Hi, I'm Jennifer Poole,
And I'm Dave Poole.
and this is our 20 days.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Our 20 Days. Today is our first episode of what we're going to call Mentorship Mondays. As you all know, the theme kind of underlying all of our 20 days is those right people in the right place at the right time in our lives, or being that person for someone else. And mentorship, certainly in a business context, is probably the best representation of that ideal. Over the next three episodes, we're going to be talking about a former boss of mine, John Langenbahn. John, I worked for him, when was this? Probably would have been mid-90s to late 90s. So a period of, I had a relationship with John for a period of 10 or 12 years in a career sense, but actually worked directly for him for 4 or 5 years. And John was the head of technology at Mead Corporation, paper company, paper giant that has since merged and found its way through a couple of other transactions and doesn't exist as a standalone company anymore, but the brand name Mead still exists. You see that in school and office products and things of that nature still out there in the stores. But we're going to talk about John, and over the next couple episodes, I'm going to have a couple of former coworkers and friends. They're still friends, not former friends. Grace Enting and Paul Mormon, who I spent a number of years working with over the years, and we all shared the great pleasure of working for John. And really want to talk about what makes a good mentor. And when I think about that question, as well as John in particular, the word humility comes to mind. There becomes a point where you've got to be a very humble human being to find a way to impart information to people in a way that they can receive and internalize and perhaps act on. And you have to live with the idea that maybe you make all these comments and suggestions or be a good example and they don't get it and they don't change. And that's got to be, I know from personal experience, it's frustrating when you're trying to help someone through a career or through a situation or through their personal life and you just don't seem to be having any impact. So you've got to have that humility and a willingness to fail, and being a failure in that regard. John was anything but that. So, and you've heard me say this on a couple of other episodes perhaps, so I'm going to repeat myself because I think it's an important thing. John always believed that it was important to kind of reinvent yourself periodically. His suggestion was about every 10 years. And I heard that message, and the theme of the message was be flexible. Know that today doesn't last forever, that there's going to be some shift in your career and your personal life that requires you to adapt and make some changes. And again, I heard what John said, but I can't say I ever consciously took that advice to proactively go out and change me or change my career or change how I approached things or personal relationships. But now that I'm 60 and I look back on my life and I look back on my career, John was about right in my case, about every 10 years or so. Starting when, I started my working life when I was 14 as a working musician. I had a paper route and ended up working at McDonald's in high school and all that sort of thing. But my first, quote, career move was as a gigging musician, somebody that played on stage and for live performance as well as working in studios. And I did that into my mid-20s. And earlier in my 20s, in my early 20s, when I was 21, 22, I started my career as we called us programmers at the time. Now I guess we call them developers or system developers at Mead Research in the research division of Mead Corporation. And spent about 10 years there. And then moved into a broader corporate role, which is where I started working for John. And spent about 10 years in roles like that. And then after a couple of moves, I ended up taking a more entrepreneurial approach to things. And Jennifer and I started, with Molly Maid and some other ventures over the next 10 or 15 years. And now here I am at age 60 and have largely retired from, quote, day jobs. We still own Molly Maid and still operate that proactively, and now we're getting into some other things like this Our 20 Days podcast and some other ventures that we're working on. So it's worked out. So about every 10 years, plus or minus, I've either grown restless and moved on to other things, or something pulled me that direction. So I think John was very prescient in saying that, that reinvention is a great theme. Is that if you can't kind of carry that idea to just day-to-day life, and I think I said a few minutes ago, being adaptive, being receptive to things around you changing, and doing what you need to do to be effective in that environment, and find a way to make the people around you happy and work as a result of all of that. So over the next couple of episodes, like I said, Grace and Paul will be joining me. We'll talk more specifically about John, and I've spoken to John. John's now back in Ohio, him and his wife Connie. So shout out to them. And hopefully this isn't terribly embarrassing to John. I know he's a very humble guy and doesn't like to talk about himself, so we're going to talk about him instead. So look forward to talking to you over the next few episodes on Mentorship Mondays here on Our 20 Days. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Our 20 Days. Join us on our20days.com for all the latest podcasts and other information. And please subscribe to Our 20 Days or join as a member for exclusive benefits. Thanks for joining us.